Welcome, everyone. We're about to get started. Okay. Good evening and welcome to the first Sweet Thursday event of the 2021 season and our second on Zoom webinar. I hope you will excuse us for any technical problems we might have. Tonight we're on Zoom webinar format, and unlike the meeting format, we cannot see or hear any of you. The chat and raise hands functions are disabled, but Q&A will be open for you to type in your anonymous questions for our author. This talk is being recorded, and we will provide you a YouTube link in a future library ad lib email. We have a capacity of 500, so sign up early if anything interests you. This hasn't yet been an issue for Sweet Thursday, but last week's WOW program on Frida Kahlo did sell out. Sweet Thursday is the author series hosted by the Friends of the Lafayette Library. My name is Jeff Deeden, and I'm the moderator tonight and the coordinator for the programming. This afternoon, we have San Francisco Chronicle columnist and award-winning author Vanessa Hua to share her perspectives about immigrant experiences as described so creatively in her book, Deceit and Other Possibilities. As the pandemic likely will preclude live events anytime soon, we have 3 additional virtual Sweet Thursdays and at least one Wonders of the World scheduled for the rest of this year. On October 1st, Joan Ryan will discuss her book Intangibles about the importance of team chemistry in success. On October 15th, Chef Bryant Terry will show us how to create delicious vegan meals, and as covered in his book, Vegetable Kingdom. And on November 19th, Lindsay Bowles-Travinsky will share her thoughts about the formation of George Washington's cabinet. As a complement to last week's WOW on Frida Kahlo, the program on the 14th will cover her husband, Diego Rivera. In order to learn about all of our programming, you can sign up for our weekly ad lib emails, which describe upcoming events. And this is on the library website, the Lafayette one, LLLCF.org. You can learn about even more programs at other county libraries on the county website, ccclib.org. In pre-COVID times, the Friends Corner bookstore sales supported a number of programs and services at the Lafayette Library. These include librarian salaries for Sunday hours, books and other materials, library programs, Friends programs, and support the Library Foundation and the Historical Society. After months of being closed by the pandemic, the Friends Corner bookstore opened again last week and is open for limited curbside pickup. Also, the Amazon store is open and can be accessed through the the Friends website. Note that we are not yet able to accept book donations. For their support, especially helping me manage this new world in Zoom, I would like to thank the Friends of the Lafayette Library staff, the foundation, and my Sweet Thursday committee members, Ruthie Thornburg and Robin Holt. Signed copies of Vanessa's book, actually, I think both of them, can be purchased at Orinda Books. Please go to their website or call them to order it. Tonight, San Francisco Chronicle columnist and author Vanessa Hua joins us to discuss the second release of her first book, Deceit and Other Possibilities. The book originally came out in 2016, and the new edition includes 3 new stories and some changes from the original version. The book was a finalist for the California Book Award and received an Asian Pacific American Award in Literature. Her novel, A River of Stars, was named to the Washington Post and NPR Best Books of 2018 lists. Vanessa has received a number of literary and journalism awards, and her writing has appeared in many publications. She also teaches writing in a number of venues. You can catch her weekly column in the datebook section of the San Francisco Chronicle on Fridays. So now we will go live and have a conversation. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thanks for having me.
Virtually to the Lafayette Library. I'm sorry we can't greet you in person and as we originally planned for our April event, but with Zoom we can reach out to more people in more places, so we'll make the best of it. How have you and your family been doing so far in the pandemic?
Well, it's something that I reflect upon quite often, whether it shows up in my column or whether it's sort of like just dealing from the day-to-day. I think, of course, we're quite happy that, because last week we not only had the shelter in place, but also the orange skies and the heat wave. And it's been wonderful to be able to get out at least these last couple of days. We went for a hike yesterday, we went swimming today. So just trying to get through what we can manage to get through, or just taking some time at the end of the day to reflect upon, even though it feels like sometimes we're on this like hamster wheel of franticness, that we did get our family safely through the day and we did get some work done. So
are your twins learning? Are they at school at home or are they attending in person?
It's distance learning in where they're going to school. So there's lots of alarms going off to mimic the bells going off. So they're always like having to log on, and we're figuring it out.
Okay, like so many of us.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the book a little bit. Here's a line I'll just start off with. The lie came easily after a lifetime of omissions and deceptions. I wanted to start off by saying that the title, Deceit and Other Possibilities, is such a provocative and cool title. It's your first book, a collection of short stories written over many years. The themes are, my take anyway, immigrant experiences and deceit. Your parents are immigrants to the US and you were born here, so you have many insights and experiences to draw upon. But I must say the plot lines are quite dark, and obviously this is intentional. People in difficult situations, making bad decisions, doing bad things. Each story includes at least one person deceiving someone. I have several things, but that's just a waste of time. So how did you decide to approach this subject of immigrant experiences from that perspective of deceit?
You know, it's interesting. I wrote each story individually. Over the first edition, it was over a period of 10 years. And then the edition that came out this year, it spans stories, all the way up through, a good 15 years total. So clearly, but, the realization that there was a theme emerging didn't come about until I saw them sort of collected together in one place, because they've been published individually in different literary magazines or different venues. But it was only when I saw it as a whole that I was able to realize that this was a theme. And I mean, I think it goes to that notion of, for immigrants or the children of immigrants, you got to fake it until you make it, right? And so for them, it's the question of deceit. Is it a strategy for survival? Is it delusion? Is it just about getting through the day? And it's interesting because the title actually came about from a conversation I was having with my mother-in-law. She's a big reader, big lover of libraries, like me and my family. And I had said, how about the responsibility of deceit, which is one of the stories in the collection, Or how about Deceit and Other Stories? Because that is sort of the nomenclature for short story collections sometimes, like some theme and then say, and other stories. She thought about it and she looked at me and said, oh, I like Deceit and Other Possibilities. And I said, well, that's not what I said, but I like that because I think it pointed out sort of, for my characters, the duality in their lives. And deceit has a negative connotation and possibility has, a positive one. But what if for these characters in all their various different situations came to see deceit as the only way they could get to possibility, that this was going to be, as you said, one decision leads to another, and how do you kind of find your way out of it? And for me, that's where a lot of stories begin. I think about a circumstance or situation, and I wonder how that character ended up there and how they may try to get out of it.
Interesting. So it wasn't intentional from the beginning.
No, I think it's interesting because I think like when you're in school, you're supposed to write these essays on theme of a novel or theme of a story. But I would probably wager that most authors start with a character or a situation, and the theme emerges, and the theme is important, say, when you're thinking about revision. But I don't know if you can necessarily like pull from your subconscious and say, like, I'm going to write a story about deceit. But you just will be drawn to the sort of stories. Authors are drawn to the stories that they're drawn to writing, and it's sometimes only, again, looking back, that you realize, or that I realized, that deceit was sort of a central theme for these characters.
Okay. Where were you in your journalism career when you decided to put these together that you'd written over a number of years into a book?
Yeah, it's funny. I used to love going into the paper every day, and I think to be able, back when I first started submitting stories, you had to go to the post office. Now there's far more online submissions, but I'd always like secretly print out like my latest submission and run to the printer, like in between stories. So this was back in, and so, but it wasn't, so it was 2004 that I started submitting stories. I mean, I'd been writing stories since I was a kid, actually. And in fact, one of the very first short story contests I won, just to go local, was the Friends of the Orinda Library and Orinda Books sponsored a contest. So, I've known Janet and then Maria and now Pat. I just want to give a shout out to Orinda Books about how much they support local authors. So in terms of, I'd been a journalist since about 97, and I'd been writing all my life, but focused on my journalism. And I remember looking at some of my short stories and wondering, do I remember how to do this? Because I'd been so focused on, reporting from abroad, reporting from Burning Man, which is, a country, a foreign country all its own. But so I started taking writing workshops or, joining writing groups. And so it was around 2004 that, I think I sent it out, and it was, won a contest in 2005 when I got the notification. And then I continued writing, like on the weekend and in the mornings and at lunch. And, but, always had it in my mind, like, oh, I want to write a book someday, or, a book length project. I want to write a novel. And I was on a reporting trip in South Korea. This was, I think, 2006. And I mentioned it to one of the other reporters. And I said, I've always wanted to write a book. She looked at me and said, then write a book. And she was only making conversation, small talk, but it really resonated with me. I realized I needed to figure out how to make fiction or writing a book the center of my life. And so I ended up deciding, for me, and not everyone has to take this path, I decided to get my Master's of Fine Arts. but I wanted the time, mentorship, and resources that a program like that would afford. And so I got it from UC Riverside. That was from '07 to '09. And then eventually I continued freelancing as a journalist, and eventually made my way back to the Bay Area. But for the short story collection, I was just writing them on and off over the years, and eventually realized, like, I guess I have enough for, if I stacked them all up, it could equal a book. And so I started sending it out to contests. And the first time around, the first time it was published through a small press, and then when the rights became available again last year, my agent was able to sell it to Counterpoint, which is a Berkeley-based press, and they're absolutely wonderful. So it's kind of circuitous, but basically, like, I think for as long as I've been a journalist in my adult life, I've still been writing fiction, but it's been to varying degrees of, how much was I going to be able to focus on my fiction.
Well, just by the average, it's something like 1.5 stories per year over that span, although I'm sure it wasn't evenly distributed.
Yeah.
And I would imagine taking those, especially since you didn't start out with the intention of writing specifically about deceit, there must have been a fair amount of massaging and editing to make it this cohesive package before it got published. Was that true, or were they ready to go?
Well, I think just every story originally appeared in a literary magazine. So to every literary magazine, I probably sent, some stories took 3 tries, some took 20. I've talked to authors of short story collections who sent each story in their collection out over 100 times before they found a home. So for me, it was, it was like, so in my collection, I write the draft, I show it to my writing teacher at the time if I had one, or I show it to my writing group. And sometimes it's also necessary to put away. One of the new stories in the book, Room at the Table, is actually a short story that I began in college. So I went to college in the mid-90s. But it's interesting, and I was talking to other writer friends, like, sometimes there are just some stories you can't quit. Sometimes there are stories that you're not ready to write yet. And so, sometimes, it's interesting that whole notion of, like, they've said, like, how do you know a book is done? It's like, or is it finished, or is it abandoned? And so sometimes, I'd like to think that we have a lifetime of work that we're going to return to. Sometimes it's not going to pull you hard enough to want to finish it, but other times it's, you have to, you'll feel drawn to finishing it.
Cool. One of the other themes is expectations, and they set up a lot of the plot lines of these stories, partly because of the cultural nature of these, where these folks come from. So these expectations lead to the conflict that makes some of these folks, or not makes them, it's just a setup for making bad decisions. Was that intentional too? I guess that just falls out of any cultural experience, and we all have different ones, but various immigrant groups they come from different backgrounds with their parents and grandparents, and where their expectations of success and where they're going to be in life are all different. I just love the way you wove that into it, and I don't know if I have a question there, but just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about those cultural expectations.
Sure, thank you. I think whether or not there's a cultural element to anything I work on, whenever I'm working on fiction, I think about stakes. Like, what's at stake? What is what do they want, even if they can't fully articulate it to themselves, and what stands in their way. And that is what drives a story forward, right? Like someone wanting something and they can't have it, someone wanting something and trying to figure out a way, or sometimes someone wanting something and figuring out they either have to abandon it or, you know, come to some reconciliation about what life would look like if they fully wanted to be themselves, open to themselves and to their families. And so, you know, the cultural aspect, it's interesting because it's like culture reflects community, you know, expectations. But, you know, there's free will, and that's where it sort of gets interesting or misconstrued or warped in the case of some of the characters where, say I wrote about a Stanford imposter that was in the story Accepted, and where it was inspired by a number of cases I had heard about. And on one hand, it's like there were unspoken expectations in this character's family, but on the other hand, her parents in no way would have ever suggested she take the path that she ended up taking. So it's that tricky balance of a character trying to make their way into the world, and you know, all the different things that might shape them, whether it's their ancestral culture, whether it's the kinds of success they may see in America, what's sort of like held up to them as, you know, as model minorities, like just what you know, capitalism, all of that, like is going to shape the decisions a character makes.
And you explore, you know, so many ways to go at it. You know, you can imagine a preconceived notion might be that immigrants come to this country and then the parents, you know, expect either to follow the old country's ways and just continue those, or maybe we came here for a different purpose, so you wouldn't have that, and instead you would go the American route, you know. So there's lots of nuance to all that. It's cool. At this point, I think we owe it to everyone to get a taste of your words. So audience folks, I arranged this in advance with Vanessa. She's going to read an excerpt from The Responsibility of Deceit.
Okay. Thank you. And this, again, is sort of I have a soft spot for this story, even though, you know, they're all my favorite stories, but I have a particular soft spot for this story because it is the very first story I published in the literary magazine. So.
And can I just give a little backdrop?
Yeah.
So this is about a gay male Chinese American who has not come out to his traditional parents. Go ahead.
Okay, and he and his boyfriend have just gone away for the weekend to Napa, where a series of things happened, and the boyfriend thinks he's about to get dropped off at bar, and Calvin will go to dinner, but Calvin has a request. The Responsibility of Deceit. Ever since I left home, I returned without fail on Sundays. Coming back from Napa, we drove past the suburbs that had grown from sleepy to self-satisfied in the last decade as the wealth seeped eastward along Highway 24. The plan was to drop him at the BART station and for me to go home for dinner, but I accelerated past the exit. I knew now I could not give up whom I loved most for my family. My parents made me the man with whom Peter fell in love. Peter made me the man I wanted my parents to love. Without both, I could have neither. Peter, engrossed in a science journal, did not notice where we were until we turned onto the street. I parked across from the house behind Jeannie's car. My sister had beaten me home. You forgot to drop me off, he said. I didn't forget. What I wanted sank in. Are you sure? He asked. Are you? He snapped the journal shut. The cooling engine ticked, solemn as a metronome. Are you worried that your parents will out you? He asked. I don't know how the woos would even bring it up, I said. It wouldn't be very polite to get into family business. This is something you should do by yourself, he said. They'll want to talk to you alone. If you're there, they can't deny you exist, I said. I don't want to be a prop, he said. He dropped the journal on the floor. They'll blame me for making you gay. Please, I asked. My back was sticky with sweat and my mouth tasted skunky. He ran his hand along the diagonal belt straps, but hesitated about the buckle. I pressed down with both hands on his, releasing him, and embraced him clumsily, inhaling his musky scent, which I could identify from a lineup of dozens. I could see the silhouette of my mother in the kitchen window of the white ranch-style house, maybe washing off bai tai in the sink or filling the battered tin teapot with water. My father was laid bare in the living room window. The television flashed against his face. He was frugal, turning on the lights in the last minute of sundown. Their scene was routine, their life the moment before they learned their only son was gay. Much confusion and blame tumbled out afterward. My parents shut me out, with my sister forced to act as a go-between, the messenger of their accusations and their pleas, first hurt, then hopeful, for me to be normal, to marry, to have children. My mother consulted a Chinese fortune teller seeking cures. When told that I would not change, she vowed to jump in front of a bus. My parents stopped boasting about me to their friends, who understood not to ask questions. 2 years later, they did not go to our wedding in San Francisco City Hall, but sent us a red envelope of crisp $100 bills. 3 more years followed, and they came back into our lives after we designed a website to attract a birth mother. Both of us smiled so hard in our pictures that our cheeks throbbed as if punched. My parents offered to pay for an egg donor and surrogate to carry our child, our son, a baby they could understand and get behind. I knew none of that then. But as I watched my parents through the window, I knew it was my responsibility to tell them. If I did not, all the other duties I tried to fulfill meant nothing. That night, the moment my key goes into the lock, my parents rush to the door. My father shouts to my mother, "Lila, Lila!" He has arrived. I hear the television turn off, the running kitchen faucet go silent, and their quick steps on the tile floor. Peter and I stand apart, flanking the welcome mat. I hold my breath until the door swings open and my parents greet me with smiles. I slip my hand into Peter's and we go in. Thanks.
Thank you. I love that. The conflict, you know, it could have been so just regular. That's a bad word, but to throw in the conflict the parents must have felt when the progeny came in, which is so important as well. Yeah, it's really cool.
Thank you.
This, I'm guessing, for what they shared, I liked how you compared and contrasted the Chinese folks at the Big Sur campground with the Chinese American woman, girl, I'm not sure her age, but young adult, hanging out with her white American friends, and the conflicts between them that arose, and how much of that comes out of your family experience? I mean,
well, it's interesting. I mean, I think just kind of taking a step back as a journalist, you know, covering Asian American community for many years, I think sometimes people come to thinking that like community, it's a monolith, everyone's immigration experiences are the same, everyone speaks the same dialect or is the same socioeconomic status, when in fact, there's tensions within the community about like who arrived earlier, who arrived later, you know, who speaks with an accent, who doesn't speak with an accent. And, you know, I remember I was on a reporting trip in China, and this Chinese student who had spent time in America, I was having dinner with him, and he said, "Why are Chinese American girls so mean to foreign students from China?" And I mean, I think it's just this disjunction of like, you know, who knows, like it could be interpersonal, or it could be like, well, I don't, you know, I want to be seen as American, and you're just a reminder that, you know, you have this face. So I thought it was really interesting I think of that as my ABC versus FOB story, like American-born Chinese and versus fresh off the boat, and sort of like those tensions that arise again, that are within a community, yet from outside the community, they're perceived as the same.
Um, well, that story dealt somewhat with racism, but not a lot. You did your book, your stories don't really focus a lot on racism. Was that intentional?
Well, I think racism or structural racism or systems of power are embedded. I mean, there's not like I think there's plenty of microaggression that it gets sort of reflected in the characters' experiences or way they've been, uh, you know, uh, deal with the world or like try to make it in the world. But I mean, I think it's not. It's a question of like, oh, what is racism, or what is again? It's that same question. It's like, does racism look? What is it supposed to look like? But I mean, to the extent I mean, it's about dynamics like within communities. It's about dynamics that people have with the broader community, and they'll be manifested in different ways. So, I mean, it's something I've become very conscious of in recent years. Is like what are the systems of power that people are grappling with, and sort of acknowledging how different groups are treated in this country, and how they deal with each other, and how to go beyond the black-white binary. So just lots of things that I've been thinking about that I think are also probably reflected and sort of through subtext or through reflected in different ways in the stories.
One stylistic element are your conclusions. The first couple stories I read, I was rather perturbed by them because they just weren't satisfying. But like so many books, once you get rolling, I started to understand it more. There were a couple of exceptions, but usually your conclusions were very much left up to the reader. And like the passage you read, sometimes you change times or places. The whole sudden ending, was that just the way you write, or just the way these came out, or am I crazy?
No, I mean, I think it's also probably more, I'm going to ask, like, do you prefer novels to short stories usuly?
I am not a person to answer because I don't read a lot of short stories.
Oh, okay. See, so exactly. So I think in general, I think short stories are closer in nature to poems than novels. Novels, or like a narrative nonfiction, you're on this 300-page journey. You have been through so much with the character that by the time you get to novels end, when you close the book, it's done. You may think about it, but it's done. You've been through a journey with them. Whereas I think a short story, again, like a poem, can it has to resonate. It has to be about a turn, about a moment in time, about a shift, and I think it can powerfully rest in an image, and it does have to almost feel like, oh, I could keep turning the page. Like it has to feel like you've reached some sort of arc within the story, but it does have to feel like the world continues in a way if you just turn the page. And so I think I think for me, it's just reflective, as it's just the nature of the short form that I almost want people to keep hoping like that there's more, that it has to feel like we had this brief time together, the reader with the story, but it's more about like a bell ringing than say it's sort of like the way it resonates versus sort of like the finality of a novel. So I don't know if it's a stylistic thing on my part, or just short stories in general that I've found maybe kind of go that way.
So it's just my ignorance.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
No, I that is totally possible. I'm going to read a little bit now, if that's okay. I want to just because another theme is transience versus permanence, which I thought was cool. And two particular passages I enjoyed and good lessons to remember. This is from Just Like Us. He was half Mexican, something I didn't, this is a adolescent female speaking. He was half Mexican, something I didn't remember until now, with caramel skin and watermelon seed eyes that could almost be Chinese. He and I looked alike, more so than Mama and me. The last time I saw Richie, I was 8 or 9 years old. Our mothers had blended mango margaritas while his father manned the grill. Richie and I watched television, not a word passing between us. He controlled the remote, flipping through the shows. Just as I started to understand, he was on to the next. That's not what bothered me, though. It was how he complained that he hated burgers without cheese, how he wanted Dr. Pepper, not Coke, how he brushed off his dad's suggestion they play ping pong. You talk that way when you think the people in your life will always be there. No one should be so confident. And then from what we have is what we need, the final paragraph. I keep the picture as a reminder of how that smile can disappear if you take for granted what you can never possess. You must make her yearn only for the life she already has, to want nothing more. So again, I'll ask you, did these just come organically, or, and there are other examples of this, you know, appreciate now is a simplistic way to think of it. How did you come to write that?
Well, thank you for picking those stories. They're ones that I love talking about. You know, I think it's a question that often comes up, you know, in among other writers, or when I'm teaching, like, how do you know when you're done? Or like, how do you know you found the right place to end it? Should I fast forward, or do I need to go back to the beginning, or does an image need to repeat? And I think what's so fun is that sometimes, you know, you're kind of struggling with it, but then one advice a friend in my writing group is like, just write 10 endings, you know? Or sometimes you get to it, and then the feeling you get when you found the right ending, I would liken it to sticking a landing. If you're a gymnast, that you've landed and your arms are, you've stuck it's similar. Like, you feel like you've stuck the landing.
You just know.
Yeah. But sometimes you've fallen a whole bunch before you've ever managed to stick the landing. So, I mean, I think there can be many instances where you feel like you're going in the wrong direction, but you needed to write all those wrong versions before you got to the right place. So it's just, but it's also a matter of revision, and sometimes you sort of just like, I gotta punch my way through to the end of the scene, and then you revise it and you revise it again, or how many times it takes before you know, we're always chasing after that feeling of sticking the landing.
You're a moderator for a number of author events. That must be different than somebody like myself who is not a writer, asking the questions of another author. How do you enjoy that experience?
Definitely. I think something that I'm a big believer in is just being a good literary citizen, and all the ways you can support an author, whether that's buying their book or requesting their book from the library, or being in conversation with them like this. And, you know, I've always thought a book launch is just so special. You know, I really feel for people whose first books came out during the pandemic. I mean, it was hard enough with this Deceit. It came out basically right before shelter in place. So all my events were immediately canceled and then put online. And so but to get back to your question, it can be a very lovely way to support another author if you, or, you know, if it's a friend or if it's someone whose work you admire and they've reached out to you. It's just, I enjoy it as a way to sort of be able to engage with other writers in this way. So, or sometimes, I remember I did one of these last week and I got to ask sort of like some insider publishing questions. So that's fun as well.
How about your writing in COVID and immigration? Have you woven those together at all? Since, you know, like in your columns?
Yeah, I definitely have been writing about different aspects of COVID in my column. Anything from you know, Chinese immigrants who are using WeChat, which is sort of their preferred social media platform. It's also kind of been in the news because the president's against TikTok and WeChat. In any case, they used it as a way to sort of organize. So I remember I did a column about that. But I've also wrote about just sort of the zeitgeist. And it's interesting. You think about what can writing do? It can lead to a change in action. It can lead to empathy. But it can also serve as a way for people to not feel so alone, to understand whether I'm writing about, you know, from my experience or in interviewing people, readers then I hope, and I've heard from, you know, feel seen, feel visible, feel validated in this very confusing time. And so I'm, you know, whenever I have had live book events, invariably there's a Chronicle reader, and I'm always very grateful to be able to meet them and to talk. You know, it's an intimate relationship. I've been doing this since 2016, and just I know I come to people at their kitchen table. So, you know, and it's the same paper I grew up reading. So I just feel very honored to be able to sort of carry on that conversation that local papers can have with readers. Yeah. But in terms of my fiction, my next novel is about Chairman Mao's teenage lover. You may or may not know he was a fan of ballroom dancing and younger women. And a lot of, you know, for such a revered man, he spent a lot of time alone behind the palace walls, so to speak. So I think for me, in working on that novel at this time, I thought a lot about loneliness and touch and isolation and what that does to someone. And, you know, there's that big question of like, what are the novels or what is the fiction that's going to be coming out of this time? And to be sure, there's going to be like the TikTok of like the explosion of, you know, COVID and what that did. And there may, you know, be very COVID-centric books. But I think it is going to shape us in ways we don't even know, and that writers everywhere are going to be approaching it. I don't want to say sideways, but it's shaping us, right? And it's going to change the way we think about or what we take for granted, and, you know, what feels important or vital to us in terms of writing. And so again, even though it doesn't appear in the pages, it's shaping us like anything else is shaping us during this time.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to open it up to questions soon, but I wondered if you wouldn't mind reading one other excerpt.
Oh, sure.
From Accepted, from The Sky Was Starting to Lighten on 134.
Okay.
Or if you have something you'd rather share, that's fine.
Oh no, I love I had fun with this ending. And so just to preface it, this is a story about a Stanford imposter who, you know, years ago I'd heard about this case where a Korean American woman from Orange County had told everyone she knew, oh, I got into Stanford, I have an ROTC scholarship. So she went to campus, you know, got to campus, told people like, you know, some mix up in housing. Can I stay with you? And she went to class, she took tests, she, turned in her blue books. And it wasn't until maybe the middle of winter quarter that the resident advisors were like, you don't go here. What are you doing? And I began to hear about other instances of imposters. There was a South Asian man at UC Irvine who claimed to be going to the medical school. He went so far as to attempt to march in the graduation ceremony when he got called out by someone who actually was graduating. There was a case at UC Riverside where someone called in a bomb threat because he failed out, but his parents wanted to come for graduation. So given that not all Asian Americans who go to higher education are imposters, I was very interested in what, how they, the lie that you start with and then sort of snowballs, and how you kind of end up having to feeding and caring for that lie. So this is at the end of the story when, things are coming crashing down, and anyway, the character takes one final action. The sky was starting to lighten. In the center of campus, nothing stirred but squirrels. At the base of a palm tree outside of the registrars, I planted a liter bottle of gasoline stuffed with strips of a t-shirt. The golden gasoline sloshed back and forth, a storm in a bottle. Back home, palm trees were common, but not like the ones on campus, which were rumored to cost a year's tuition. I heard the whine of an electric cart. I ducked behind a post and a groundskeeper went by. I'd have to hurry. I set down the letter, sealed in a clear plastic bag and held in place with a brick. Though I'd written it at the end of a very long night, the words had rushed out with the inspiration I wished for in my college entrance essays. I ranted against rich kids and the parents who spoiled them, acting like they owned the world, like they were the world itself. I taunted them, implying I'd scattered booby traps and bombs around campus. Dousing the tree with gasoline, I lit the wick, which sputtered with the delicious hiss of a lawn sprinkler. The syrupy fumes made me giddy with the happiness I once thought I might achieve here. I might have predicted the investigation, the news stories, the online fan pages. Elaine Park rocks. At the jail, though, my mother in near collapse, propped up by my sister, her face awful and old, marked by grief as all her hard years had never marked her. My father asking why, not in Korean, not in SAT words, but in the plain English he reserved for customers, for strangers. His hope in me would do me in. I can't, I would say, my voice breaking, I can't lie anymore. His caved-in expression, you have to tell everyone the truth. Telling me won't help. Yet, if I had been thinking clearly and stopped, if I had retreated, I would have missed the moment when I became mighty and billowing. The smoke drifted into the stratosphere with the crackle and roar of a wildfire. The dizzying smell of gasoline, of charcoal, of ash come alive. The flaming palm tree, the most spectacular of all. An enormous 4th of July sparkler, a gold-orange celebration burning on, a monument, a memory that would far outlast my time here. Thanks.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, like I said, the first couple of stories I read, I was perplexed by, but it just really gelled for me, and I love all of them. There's just so many little things. So maybe I'm a new fan. You've converted me into a short story reader, so I can expand my horizons a little bit. If you have something you want to cover, otherwise I'm starting to check out some of the Q&A, and we can let the audience get involved if that's cool.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Let's see what the audience questions are.
So thank you, Ruthie, by the way, for answering some of the technical issues. First, I wonder if Vanessa's column writing is taking more precedence than current fiction writing for her.
I think I've figured out how to sort of manage a balance of it because, well, I'll be clear. With distance learning, it's just a lot of running around, making sure the kids are on schedule. And so I do have like sort of less uninterrupted time. So I have to figure out times I can work on the weekend or times in the afternoon where we might get some help, or I trade off with my husband. So overall, I just have less time. But in some ways, I think maybe my training in the newsroom has just made me work faster against a deadline, knowing that like I'm about to have to jump on in 45 minutes to help with math class. So in terms of just my column, I want to be topical and to respond to the news, but I will sort of try to maybe queue up, when possible, 3 at a time, let's say, so that in the weeks that follow, I can have more time to just focus on my fiction. So it's always going to be a balance, because again, you want the column to be timely, but I love having that balance. A column will come out, within days of writing it. So that, that's a sprint. Whereas a book is marathon, like a project that you're working on for years. And so I like being able to do both. But so to answer your question, I'm finding a way to do both. It's not ideal, but what is in 2020. So.
Right. I'm wondering, being non-writer, when you pull these columns, do you like put tabs or whatever the term is for subject matter and then send them to certain files or keywords for use later? Like if you're going to write a short story about, and then somehow weave what you wrote a couple of years ago into something, and you say, oh yeah, I remember that.
That would be smart, or that would be more organized than I am. I think sometimes when I wind up trying to find something, I just type Google and a line from it if I kind of want to get refreshed on it. But
okay.
That would be a great system. But I think I just invariably return to, I just know things because I'm drawn, I write about what I'm passionate about, whether that's in fiction or nonfiction. And so in that way, I've built up expertise around it.
Because you're young and have a memory, you can still pull that out of your brain.
No. Google helps prod my memory. So
here's a question about River of Stars. In the wonderful sequence where Scarlett parlays a bottle of liqueur into a motorcycle and rent money, is this deceit or something else?
Well, great question. And I just want to explain a little bit what A River of Stars is. So this is my novel. It's a pregnant Chinese, Thelma and Louise, 2 very pregnant Chinese women on the run from one of those maternity centers in Southern California, where women go to give birth to their kids without U.S. citizenship. They end up hiding out in San Francisco's Chinatown, a community I love and have covered for many years as a journalist. So Scarlett, the main character, is trying to make rent money, but she gets a freebie bag from the Glide Memorial Church, gives out. Many of you might be familiar with it, but she sort of trades her way up from the frozen turkeys, which she doesn't want, all the way up to a motorcycle and to her rent money. And so I don't know if it's deceit, because I think everyone who got the trade was happy with it. But I think in general, that book deals a lot with immigrant entrepreneurship, which is something I'm interested in. Sort of, again, you're like, well, what do I have at hand that might have value? Is it being able to cook something? Is it this thing where I need to figure out just the right person for it? And is it about some salesmanship? Is that deceit? I think it's sort of like that notion again of like striving or figuring out what trying to find your way out. So.
Okay, forgive me, I'm answering one. Which writers do you admire? Which story by another author has stayed with you?
Junot Diaz, his short story collection, Drown, I think I read it like a million times backwards and forwards. I love work by Ian Lee. She, one of her stories, 10,000 Years of Good Prayers, is about a woman who gives birth to someone. She stared at a portrait of Mao so much when she gave birth. He was born with the face of Mao. It sounds, it's an amazing story. It's available online. And actually, just kind of a side story, it was the first story she wrote. She sent it to all these literary magazines. They all rejected it. Then she sort of sent it to the most prestigious, biggest publication, the Paris Review, and they took it and they published it. And so I always love sharing that story with students, because it's like, write the story you want to write. And then sometimes, you know, if you get rejected, it's because it just didn't find the right editor. And you know, anyway, so I hope that answers your question. Ian Lee, Edward P. Jones, you know, Juno Diaz. I could give recommendations all day. So.
Okay. Here's one. What was the most challenging story for you to write?
So, you know, maybe it was the one that I mentioned before, the one that took me like 20 years to write, that I started in 95 and finished in 2019. I just couldn't figure out, it's about a woman coming home for a holiday dinner, and there's all these fault lines running through the family, and they're trying to figure out, she, you know, I think the initial draft, she was very passive. She was an observer. And I think a lot of times, you know, I've seen this in writers, like there's this desire, like, because they are observers in life, that it gets reflected in their characters, but just figuring out what sort of agency she could have scene by scene. I think that's how I finally finished it.
Is that Room at the Table?
Yes, Room at the Table. Yeah.
Well, that one, that's got a lot going on.
Yes.
Very complicated. All right. I was wondering if you were always thinking of your novel when you were writing your short stories.
Well, some of the short stories predate my novel, but some of them I wrote concurrently. And some of them actually are sort of outtakes from the novel. And actually a reader the other day just figured out, she was like tweeting at me. She's like, is this the same shortbread company as featured in the novel? So if you enjoyed A River of Stars, it could be fun for you to pick up Deceit, to see sort of like stories that were standalone, sort of subplots, or I had originally crafted it a different way. So there's that. You know, some of my novels might end up elsewhere. But also when you're writing any long project, there's periods of you know, you need to set it aside, or my agent needs to read it, or my editor needs to read it. So say, for example, right now, my Mao novel is with my editor. So I'm working on a new short story that I'm really excited about. So it's good to have different things that you're working on, whether it's essays or short stories, or I don't know if I could start another novel project right now before I kind of, you know, dive back into the Mao novel, but I like being able to have more than one thing that I'm working on.
Here's one that I can relate to. I have read the ending of The Shot at least 10 times. If I read it 20 times, will I know it really happened, or is the magic in not really knowing?
Well, it's funny. I remember at the end of the novel, The Awakening by Kate Chopin, I remember reading this in college, and you know, of course, it's this devastating ending. She swims off and commits suicide, but she doesn't die in those pages. And I remember it was either the professor or another student. She's like, no, for as long as as far as where the book goes, she's swimming. You can just imagine she's always in that like in between state, that she, you know, isn't dead. She's still fully alive. So in terms of The Shot, clearly a lot of bad things are coming his way, and there's a lot of tension that's been built up, but I felt it more powerful to end in the moment where he still has hope, to almost offer, to show that moment of grace that can still exist in a character's life, even when it's about to go very, very badly. So.
Got it. Okay, there's some complimentary things here. People saying that they like your column, etc. I think I'm going to wrap it up here with a question. Well, I got two.
Okay.
First, do the boys ever read your column? And second, where were your parents born, and how old were they when they immigrated to the U.S.?
Sure. As for my boys, I remember I'll show them, look, it's mommy. I'll show them the column, but they sort of immediately flip past it to get to the comic section, which is the same section. So I think they're aware of it. And one son actually said, like, I said, oh, how do you feel about mommy being a writer? And he's like, oh, well, it's good because you're famous. I'm like, well, like, I don't know, not like movie star famous. But so they're aware. And I've read studies actually that the sons of working moms do end up growing up to be more sort of equitable, like around the household. So I think the fact that I have something else going on besides, like, that I have this outside work project is a good way of sort of providing, being a sort of role model. So they're
8 or 9 years old?
They're 9. Yeah, they turn 9 over summer. And so I think they're interested, but not really. So, and in terms of my parents, so they were born in wartime China and sort of in the 30s, in the years leading up to World War II, but still under continuous Japanese attack. And so they grew up in China. They and along with many Chinese went to the island of Taiwan, and that's where they sort of finished out their teenage years, went to college, and then they both got graduate school fellowships in the Midwest. My dad actually came on a slow boat from China. It was a 3-week cargo ship that, like,
they were not together.
No, they were not together. They did not meet until my dad was going for a job interview in Chicago, and he ran into a classmate exiting the I House at the University of Chicago, and they said, "Oh, you're in town? Let's go get dinner. My girlfriend will bring a friend," and that friend was my mother. So. Yeah.
What cities did they come from?
In China?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
or were they rural?
This is an essay I am working on now. It's inexact because, for example, my dad would sometimes say when he tell me, "Oh, I was born in Wuhan," or sometimes he'd say I was born in Wuchang, and I think, like, well, how could you not know? Just say the city you're from. And then later, I realized that Wuchang was absorbed by Wuhan later. And then to actually say, oh, well, where did you grow up? They moved, and he sent me a list before he passed away, but they moved several dozens of times in their childhood, like unimaginable to us. Sometimes they're escaping Japanese forces in a wood-burning car. Sometimes they're staying in inns for a few weeks just to, avoid getting bombed. So, like, how it's hard to say, like, where you from when you move around so much. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about actually right now.
And this is just me. Did they only know the local dialects, or do they speak Mandarin?
They're from Mandarin speaking families, but my dad could always order in Cantonese when getting dim sum in Chinatowns, and traditional Chinatowns speak Cantonese and another related dialect. And I asked, like, why? And I think, again, at the time he said something like, oh, we moved around a lot when I was a kid and I'd pick it up from other kids. But looking at where they moved, I understand now, like, yes, it was a function of war. I might think, like, oh, cool, my dad speaks Cantonese, but it was because he had this wartime childhood.
I see.
Yeah.
And were you raised speaking Mandarin?
So I understand it much better than I can speak it. I did go to Chinese school for a few years, and I took it in college a bit, but it's always less than I wish it could be. But I was able, when I did reporting for the Chronicle and for my novels, I was able to get around with my Chinese.
Okay. Well, great. This has been a lot of fun and very illuminating. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I will just remind everyone, go get a book. Now you did work out, you have signed copies
Yes,
and are
yes,
into books?
yes. And if you, anyone listening would like me to have it made out to them or a friend or whatever, I'm happy to write a personalized inscription.
Cool. Well, good luck with your finishing up your new novel. I won't ask you to divulge the title, but you probably don't know it yet. And we'll watch your reporting and stay safe. And thank you very much.
Thank you. This was a delight, and much love, sending much love to all the libraries.
All right.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Bye, Vanessa.